All right, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining. Just going to give everybody a moment to join it, and then we'll get started. Hopefully this week everyone can see my screen. Last month we had a little issue with viewing it. Hopefully the presentation, the main slide or title slide is available to everybody. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to discuss awareness training and personnel security. Got my background here, Chief Information Security Officer with Ntiva. The agenda for today, I'm going to cover some nomenclature and assumptions. I've added an important update slide. This will be as things come out. Every month we may not have any updates, but we did this month. Some supplemental and individual guidance and practices, and then specifically to areas 3.2 and 3.9 of NIST 800-171. So again, I won't go over this slide in detail. I put it in here for your review later in case you want to watch the video if you couldn't attend. But again, this is to level set and make sure that each month everyone knows what we're referencing when we say something. Like now when we're saying level 2, we were talking about the 3-level model. The new slide that's on here, the important updates, something came out this month that I wanted to draw attention to, and that was that the CMMC program was going to move offices within DoD. So now it's going to move under the Chief Information Officer. What on the surface appears like no big deal, they're just transferring responsibility. I have read some articles that say they felt that the program wasn't moving fast enough, there wasn't enough clarity, and maybe moving it under new leadership will help kind of invigorate folks. But as a result, one of the things that I noticed was an article that came out talking about more companies having to get a CMMC assessment after all. And as many of you are probably aware, back in November when 2.0 came out, there was this big push of maybe 40,000 or 80,000, or they just randomly picked numbers. But some number of contractors would now be allowed to self-attest at level 2. Level 1, you could always self-attest at. And that really seemed to make people have a bit of a sigh of relief of, maybe I don't need an auditor. And one of the things that I've been saying all along is I wouldn't go with that logic. I would really keep operating under the idea that you will have to be audited. And if you get lucky enough to go after a contract that doesn't require it, congratulations. You still need to attest that you're doing the things. So you would still need all of the security that was in place as if you were being audited. But don't rely on that in case they were to backtrack or you were to go after a contract that required it. Well, according to this article, and I've got the link there that you can take a screenshot of and go take a look at on your own time. They've come out and said as recently as February 10th at a town hall that the Deputy DoD CIO, David McCown, said that all 80,000 companies are going to require third-party assessments. And where he's coming from this, the quote at the bottom was, he said basically everyone falls into the category of either being a cleared defense contractor or having some critical industry tie, which means everyone's going to end up having CUI and therefore needing an assessment and an audit. So this goes back to what we were saying before, what we saw prior to November, what we're seeing out in just articles that are being published right now, where the DoD is lumping almost everything under CUI. There's FCI, CUI, and then there should be a third bucket of everything that doesn't fall into it. Although the more and more you read, the more they just keep stamping things as CUI. So if everything's in CUI, then no matter what you deal with, you're going to have to deal with CUI. You're going to need level 2 at a minimum. And then based on these comments, expect to be audited. There hasn't been a clear-cut reason why they've done this or why these comments came out, but the speculation on numerous sites is that without the assessment, we're right where we are today. Everyone who's got a DoD contract and has DFARS clauses that they're supposed to meet just attest that they are meeting it. Simply by, hey, I was awarded the contract and I tell the government I'm doing it. But the more they've audited, the more they've found out that people aren't doing it. So the only way to truly fix this is to have that third-party auditor come in and do the assessment. So again, for what it's worth, I hope everybody who's on these live streams has always just planned on getting the audit either way, and this really will have no effect on you. But if you weren't, this is something to pay attention to. For this week's or this month's webinar, we have the same general resources listed over on the left, much smaller number of NIST special publications to reference, only 3 on the right, that these are specific to the family or practice. So that'll make researching these much easier. There's also a much smaller and fewer number of actual practices, which is why 3.2 and 3.9 were combined into one presentation. So obviously, the fewer practices you have to meet, the fewer resources you'll have to go back and consult with and read the guidance. So individual practices, we're talking about awareness and training, which is 3.2, and then personnel security, which is 3.9. I've listed all 5, and again, there's only 5 across those 2 areas here so that you can see what each one is, and then we're going to talk about each one in detail here in a minute. But very basic language, again, when you see this, if you were to read simply this statement or these statements that are on the screen, provide security awareness training on recognizing and reporting potential indicators of insider threat, that's very vague. There's a lot of ambiguity there. What does it mean? Can you just take a simple security awareness training once a year and you check the box? But again, I give you the supplemental guidance because there's a lot more that you have to go back and read into the sub-bullets that are in 800-53 to see what are you truly having to do to check all of the boxes. And again, these little one-liner, one-sentences type explanations at a high level appear fantastic. They're easy to interpret. They're easy to say you're going and doing something, but we all know that there's a lot more work involved and it goes to a much greater depth. So let's look at some of the individuals now. So I highlighted in blue just the practice or control itself, and then my points or comments are below each. And this will follow through all the slides. So ensuring that managers, system admins, and users of the systems are made aware of security risks as far as their activities and applicable policy standards and procedures are concerned seems like a fairly straightforward thing. It's almost like saying just make sure everyone knows about security, the risks and things that they do. It's the general awareness that we're trying to get out there. However, if you go a little bit more in depth, you find out that the CMMC program, if you will, or framework, allows organizations to determine the training frequencies. This can be a bit of a problem because if you're deciding something that's not in line with what DoD or any other federal agency does, you may have to change your policies and your practices and procedures once you go to the audit. So what I recommend is, and this is fairly standard across all of DoD and federal government, is that you have an onboarding process where security awareness training is completed right when someone's hired. You could give them the links before they start. So maybe when they give their 2-week notice at their last organization, you send them links and you say, complete the training, print out the certificates, and those will be needed the first day you start work. If you have an office location, maybe you have a kiosk set up hooked to a USB printer, and the first thing the employee does is comes in, does orientation, and then immediately sits down, completes the training, prints the certs, and they don't get access to their email accounts or any systems until that's completed. And again, if you do it the first day or prior to training, it's very simple. It doesn't get in the way of the employee onboarding. Once you have it done one time at the beginning, then there's an annual period set thereafter. So depending on your contract dates, depending on federal government requirements or DoD requirements, you could set that to whatever you want. I typically tend to set it to end of Q3 or even Q4. The nice thing about doing it with Q4 is that if you wait until the end of the year, you can, people can come and go. And if people are leaving throughout the year, they're not taking training and then they aren't even here to report the training because either they were terminated, they quit, whatever. So only those that are still there at Q4 are taking it. That will cut down on the number of people taking the training. You can also coincide it with any type of annual corporate training you might have. And it just makes it very easy to say, hey, everybody has to have it done by a certain date. I typically will actually pick something like November 30th and say that anyone who's not completed it by November 30th, they are not approved to take PTO in December. So any plans they might have had to take off for the Christmas holidays would not be authorized until their training is complete. This way, you're guaranteeing that everybody who goes on training on PTO mid-December is doing so after completing the training. A lot of times you'll see, especially at the end of the year, someone will say, well, I'll come back and do it right when I get back. and then they end up taking an extra day or two of PTO, the year completes, they don't complete the training. Now they may come in on January 2nd and do the training, but from a did you meet the requirements for the year prior, all of your personnel will not be trained. So if you're looking for a way to implement it, I think doing Q4 is a great thing. And like I said, put a date of the end of November and deny PTO until it's complete. That the denying of PTO will get people to finish the training fairly quickly. You can also implement retaking training if there's a user who has a security incident, they're clicking on phishing campaigns, et cetera. So you can make this a pretty standard process where anything that comes up that user has done that would be viewed as negative, have them retake the training, reprint the certificates. It's more ammunition for you should this go further, and if you had to terminate an employee for some reason. It also obviously lets the employees know how serious and important this is to the organization. I think you should also publish a formal policy on training and awareness, what your expectations are, where to go to get the training, when the training should be completed. It should be right alongside your employee handbook, so anybody who joins the company should have easy access to it and know where to go to get this information. All of your line managers, especially, because they're going to be responsible for ensuring folks actually complete the training. And then you would also want to look at maybe a training repository. So, depending on the size of the organization, this can become quite a challenge. But do you have employees email the completed certificates? Are they uploaded into a repository? Are they part of your HR system? A lot of different options there. The catch, though, that I found is ensuring that all of the certificates are signed, dated, and proper. Someone could easily take the wrong training, email a certificate, and if you just see an email with 2 or 3 certificates, you think they're good when in reality they're not. So my practice has always been to have someone actually open each certificate and then mark them down in a ledger as being complete, incomplete, if something was done wrong and they need to redo it, et cetera. The ledger then serves as a great way to show an auditor you're actually maintaining this type of program. Some additional consideration items here. Do you want to hang posters in the office? Do you want to have security messaging throughout the office? You can buy Post-its that have messages on it. You can buy mouse pads, things like that. You can give those out as swag when people join the company. You could send out monthly email advisories reminding people to be vigilant and what to do if they think they spot a security issue. Reports on things that are coming out. Hey, these are things that we're seeing out in the world. Be extra vigilant, et cetera. You can also put log-on banners and warnings. This is fairly common practice in the federal government that before you can put your username and password into any of a government furnished equipment and many corporate furnished equipment, that you have to click OK to that warning banner. 2.2 here, or 3.2.2, talking about personnel are trained to carry out their assigned information security related duties and responsibilities. This is one that I think is overlooked by most, I won't say all, but close to all organizations. And this goes above and beyond the annual security awareness training that I just spoke of. And this is role-based security training. So this is additional training that's specific and targeted at an employee's roles and responsibilities. So this is also normally done annually. You can assign this January 1st and say, hey, you have to get it complete anytime during the year. The due date would coincide with your security awareness training. But this is really for anyone who's changed roles within a company, anyone who's taking on a new role, and anyone who has a specific role that meets certain requirements, such as the ones in the next bullet. So if you're a software developer, you're an architect, you deal with acquisitions, you integrate systems, administer systems, you're an engineer over tools, or any of the security team, for example, you should have a heightened awareness of security as it relates to your position. So you may take, let's say, an hour or 2 of annual security awareness training, and then you may take an additional 4 to 8 hours or 2 to 8 hours of role-based training. And the point here is that the training is specific to how you do your job. So if you were a Windows systems admin, you would want to take training related to Windows. If you're a network admin, maybe you're taking some Cisco or Juniper training. There are ways to buy programs through vendors where you can handpick ones that apply to everyone. That's the way I try to do it, where you can say this security training is above and beyond, but it integrates a little bit of everything, and I can lump more people into it, so I have fewer actual training programs that I have to manage. But at worst case, if you couldn't find that training or didn't want to pay for it, having something specific to each type of personnel. And again, because of the difficulty and challenges here, coming up with enough content, the additional hours, you're more than likely going to have to pay for a paid learning management system. I've seen a lot of folks try to do this through go out and watch webinars and things like that, but a lot of the webinars will not provide a certificate of completion. A lot of them won't track how long the user was there. So if the user goes out and spends 2 minutes, fast forwards through YouTube, for example, you have no real way to know that they did the training. Some programs will allow you to just take a screenshot, but again, that doesn't really help. Some of the more sophisticated ones, you watch a webinar, and let's say it's a 60-minute webinar and you watch it for 15 minutes. There's a button that always says print certificate there. If you click the print certificate, it will actually say on there that you attended 15 minutes. So if you can find something like that and you can find enough of them, that's a great alternative. But then you also have to have somebody who's there to answer the question of, is this applicable to the person and their role? And again, that's going to be much more difficult. It's much easier to define it up front and just tell everyone, here's what you have to take. And just like with SAT, make sure you're maintaining copies of any completion, certificates, records of training, and a ledger if needed or required by your contract. And then if you're looking at contractual requirements, you always want to check with your contracting officer or the contracting officer representative, your CO or your core, and make sure that they don't have anything additional. My last contracting position was with the federal government, with CMS, and they had a specific HHS records management training requirement each year above and beyond SAT and RBST. So that was an extra item that I needed to add into everyone's training program. The next one is the security awareness training on potential indicators of insider threat. This one's a little bit more difficult. There's ways that you can get through this and make it easy to check a box. The problem is that we haven't seen how the CMMC auditors are going to evaluate this one. So if we go the easy way of checking a box, it may not be sufficient. So what I've tried to do is give you more best practice and the better way of doing it, understanding that there may be costs involved with this. So the best way to do it is just to create an insider threat program. However, I've done this before. A comprehensive program is very time consuming. I had a full-time person working on it for 6 months, and all we basically got through was the framework and some of the documentation. We hadn't actually put any systems in place yet. There's just so many areas to cover that are listed under insider threat. You may be able to take a few of them off. For example, if you don't have a physical office space, you might be able to remove the physical security aspect of it, and that cuts down a little. But the big thing here is it requires involvement with all of your departments, HR, finance, security, et cetera, that it's really a whole org type program. Security may lead the effort, but everyone's going to be involved. And again, when you get that many people involved in this many topics, it's very extensive and a lot of work. You could go kind of the middle route and procure some tools such as intrusion detection and prevention, or IDS and IPS, as well as log aggregators or SIMs. These would be ways to ingest logs and to send all of your data through tools where the tools can block a lot of the malicious content automatically. And then you can have Security Operations Center or SOC analysts that are reviewing the logs that are coming into the SIMs, that are producing alerts and different dashboards and look for indicators of compromise. It's a middle ground here in that it's not a full-fledged insider threats program, but the behaviors that the program would be looking for can be accomplished through most of these tools. There is a big brother aspect of it, obviously. You have to collect information on users, their behaviors, what they're doing on their workstations, what websites they're going to, the amount of time they're spending working versus looking at web pages, those kinds of things. So it's not always well taken by employees and can give a negative experience. So most of these will be implemented as security measures for preventing malicious content, and then kind of stop short of the insider threat program. The other piece here is training employees on how to spot coworkers that may have problems. I listed a few here, there's obviously more, but looking for folks with disgruntled attitudes that, maybe they got a bad performance review and now, or passed over for a promotion and now they're disgruntled. They could have financial problems in their life that's causing them to behave differently. Maybe they're going to sell corporate secrets or trade information. They could have problems in their personal lives, maybe a messy divorce or breakup that's causing them problems and it's affecting work. Or there could be something in the workplace, such as a sexual harassment issue, workplace violence, et cetera. So there's really a laundry list of things that could be affecting them. But there's two types of training that really should occur. One to the base user that just says, if you see these types of behaviors, here's who you should report it to. Should it be your line manager or your first manager in your chain of command? Should it be to an anonymous hotline, et cetera? And then for line managers, how to deal with it when you spot it, because you have more information on the user and their performance reviews and things like that, as well as when people are reporting it to you. How do you protect people's privacy? How do you make sure you get the right folks in HR involved so that you don't break any laws or corporate policies, et cetera? So really good to get that. I think even if you take the security aspect out of it, if you have employees and you care about them, they're going to go through some of these or multiple bullets here at some point in time in their life and their career, and understanding how to reach out and support them is valuable in showing your commitment to them. And then the last two that are personnel security related, first one really speaks to the screening or vetting process prior to someone having access to CUI. We typically look at this like it's an HR activity before they're hired, a background check, a drug test, et cetera. Those are all things that have to occur. There's ways to obviously bypass those and people can get around them. The important or more important part in my mind is once they're onboarded, watch their employee conduct, look at their integrity, look at their judgment, their loyalty, their stability, but look at it before it becomes a security problem. If you have someone who has an integrity problem and they lie about little things all the time, they're unimportant, most people might just overlook that. But if they'll lie about those small unimportant things, would they tell the truth if they committed a security incident, even if it was accidental or unintentional? You can look at their behavior and see what is their track record, what is their likeliness to be truthful later. And I want to put a special note next to judgment. Especially with insider threat, it takes on a very negative tone sometimes. We start to balance these ideas in our head and play games about, well, was it malicious intent, non-malicious? Was it intentional, unintentional? I think this really speaks to their motive. If you want to look at whether someone did something with malicious intent and intentionally did it, that speaks to the character of that person. But from a risk and finance and reputation perspective at the organizational business level, it's irrelevant. If someone steals all of your trade secrets or accidentally puts them on the internet for everyone else to steal, the end result to the organization is absolutely the same. So if you start to treat things as malicious, non-malicious, intentional, unintentional, you'll start to treat the behaviors differently and the consequences and the punishments differently. And as a result, you'll have two sets of standards for the same behavior when the result to the organization is always the same. That's something that seems to be debated in most training courses you go to where you're deploying tools to support some of this, like the SIM tools that we were talking about and the insider threat tools. My recommendation is just get all of these terms out of your head and just focus on what was the impact to the organization. And then probably most important at the end, make sure you're vetting your processes to ensure you're meeting local, state, and federal guidelines, as well as any contractual obligations. There's no point building all of this out and then missing something like I didn't do what the DoD asked me to contractually. And last control here, talking about CUI being protected during and after personnel actions such as terminations and transfers. So you want to ensure that there's a proper onboarding and offboarding process. In my experience, organizations often will focus on the onboarding piece more so than offboarding, because as you onboard people and as your systems grow, access grows, people can't do the work they need to do without it. So they're going to come to you and say, how do I get access to X, Y, and Z? You're probably going to document that at some point to make the next onboarding roll a little bit more smoothly. But when you offboard, it tends to be a little less scrutinized. It's almost like I'm going to put a ticket in to have their equipment returned and their accounts disabled. But do you truly know all the different accounts they had, all the locations, their access, et cetera? This can also occur when they're moving from position to position. So if you stay within the same job family, maybe I'm a project manager and then I go to a senior project manager, there's no change. But if I go from a project manager to a system admin, I should be giving up certain permissions and then I should be getting certain permissions or access, depending on the role. And that is often overlooked. So you'll see a lot of folks who start on the engineering side or the admin side who have a ton of permissions. They change roles and they carry them throughout their career when they shouldn't. So again, look for simple things like returning corporate or government furnished equipment and peripherals. Think about badges and keys. Maybe someone has a key to a networking closet, disabling badges even if they don't return them because they're likely going to throw them away. Removing the access to all systems, applications, and data repositories, with data repositories probably being the most important since we're talking about CUI in most cases. Disabling accounts and access. So it's one thing to remove an account, it's another thing not to disable or delete it, where someone could still access it or someone else could use that account to try to sabotage you. And then perform exit interviews. It's unlikely that if they're too disgruntled, they'll give you all the reasons why, but any information you can glean out of these meetings will help you improve your security posture. And most importantly, again, make sure it's all documented and that you have evidence you're following it. As we've seen with all of the CMMC controls, it's one thing to have a tool, solution, technology, and a plan in place. But if an auditor comes in and says, show me your onboarding and offboarding process, and you dust off this electronic doc, and then you can't provide any evidence that you're actually doing it, or your evidence is less than 30 days old, and we're recommending at least 90, it could be seen to the auditor as the same as if you just don't have anything. And that's it. So I'll look in the chat here for any questions that you folks may have, but hopefully that gave you some ideas there on things that you can do. A question came in about slides and other materials being made available afterwards. These are converted into YouTube videos, so you'll be able to go out and watch them, but the slides aren't actually emailed out. Any other questions? Good question. All right, and on that note, I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day as always. I know we're busy. Thanks for joining and look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great day.